Hello and welcome to my supplemental videos for the Asteroids project that we made in Unity. So in this video we're actually going to look at retooling the weapon system. And in this project I've already gone and begun the basics of a multi-shot laser. And I wanted to take a look at a few things we could do to make it work better, because you can notice that it's not even colliding. This laser does, but this one's being completely ignored. And so there's a few things that we could change to make this work a lot better, and it really kind of expand our ability to add features in the future. So I've already gone and created a separate prefab, I've created a separate spark, and I've taken care of all the different graphical changes. So I've already set up my shooting method to include using this new weapon, and one of the important features of this new weapon is that it actually is using a different script. Instead of using the laser basic script that the basic laser uses, I'm actually using a separate one called laser multi. Now I don't necessarily need to do that for this project, but if you wanted to set up a weapon that had different properties, you would need to. If you wanted to have some kind of like charge up weapon or a zigzag weapon, you would need to have a different script that handles the movement of the laser. But that is posing a problem when we try to collide with the asteroid. You can actually see from my playing that the asteroid small was having a null reference exception. And where that's coming from is actually right here inside of our on trigger, that if we collide with a player projectile, we want to scan its script called laser basic to get the damage. Well, the problem is it's called laser multi, and so that's kind of problematic. And then also we're accessing laser basic to get the spark. So we need to kind of rethink how we set this up in order to make this work with any possible player script. So that means we are going to need to introduce a new programming concept that was covered in AP Computer Science, and they took it out of the curriculum. But let's go and let's do it actually in Unity just to make things work out correctly. Inside the scripts folder, right-click it and create a new C# script. And I'm going to rename this to player projectile, no spaces, and then double-click it. This thing is going to be kind of different though. So I am going to take out a few things that we used to always have. So I'm going to delete the inheritance from mono behavior. This is not going to be a mono behavior. And I'm going to delete all the other stuff. I'm going to change it from a class. This is going to be the biggest thing. That's now an interface. An interface is a special type of abstract class where there's no actual execution code. It just outlines the methods that a class needs to have. And so if we look at what was inside of Asteroid Small, we seem to need to have some kind of get damage method, and we need some kind of way to access the spark. We're just accessing the variable, but that's kind of sloppy. So we're going to need like a get spark method. So inside of my interface, we're going to say public, well, I guess I forgot the return type of damage. Get damage returns an integer. So public int get damage, semicolon. Oops. Oh. You don't need to specify public because it's an interface. It's guaranteed to be public. I don't think you need to. Let's use static anyway. No, don't need it. Java uses static. And then let's also define a game object return called getSpark. And that's all we're going to put in my interface. Because what an interface is a guarantee that anything that implements the interface will have a get damage method and a get spark method. So let's see if we can put this to use. I'm saving it because you need to save it to make sure it understands that this needs to happen. Let's go to Laser Basic and tweak something. So in addition to inheriting from mono behavior, let's put a comma here and specify player projectile. And you'll see that it gives me the red squiggle because I have not fulfilled the promise of including a get spark method. I do have a get damage method, but I have not created a get spark method. So you can have it add one if you wanted to. We'll just do implement interface, and we can go down and find it, and we can see that public game object sparked throw is not yet implemented. Well, we know what we need to return. We just need to return the variable called spark because that's what the spark is. And so we're good here. Now, any future projectile that you make would need to inherit from player projectile. So this class is inheriting from both mono behavior, and then it's implementing the interface player projectile. You can continue to add commas and include other interfaces that it's going to implement from if you had more things you wanted to. So jumping over to my laser multi-script, which is incidentally identical to Laser Basic, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to have it implement the player projectile interface. Again, it's got the red squiggles because I have not implemented the getSpark method. Well, we can just tell it to implement the interface. And you can see that it's added my getSpark method. And I can return a spark here. And the spark refers to that value I had here as a instance variable. So let's save there. Now for the big part, the part that allows us to write our collision code for only one type of projectile and have it work for all projectiles. So we're going to have to do this in both asteroids small and big, but let's start with asteroid small. So instead of getting the laser basic components, this concept is called polymorphism. We're able to get a parent class instead. So instead I can choose to get a player projectile because laser basic is a player projectile, so it's happy. Any other type of script that we create that inherits from player projectile, we could do that. Now the limitation is you only have access to methods that were defined inside of the interface. You can actually see it's been stripped down to only get damage and get spark. I don't even think we had any other methods. But you wouldn't be able to see anything but the methods that have been declared in the interface. So let's change this from accessing this off of Laser Basic to accessing off of Player Projectile. And we will instead use getSpark. And let's hit save. For quickness, we can just copy and paste this and go put this inside of the big asteroid code. So I'm going to jump over to big asteroid and go to my on trigger enter part where I have my take damage and spawn the spark, and I'm going to paste it in there. So now it uses player projectile instead of the other thing. So we'll hit save there, and that should fix my issue with collisions. Now we should be able to collide with my multi-shots. And now we don't have to add separate code to detect different weapons. If it's a player weapon, if it has this inheritance, you can see that that's just going to grab the, it's a child of player projectile, so it will work fine. Alright, so that's kind of cool, but let's do a few things. Now that I have more than one weapon, I really need to give some serious thought to how I'm going to handle my ability to fire. Because right now, I'm actually handling this attack cooldown as part of my shooting script. But it seems like I have every other piece of information contained inside of my weapon. The damage, the critical chance, the travel speed, the exist duration. So much of the behavior of the weapon is being stored inside of this script that it seems weird that the fire rate is the only thing being contained in the player script. So let's think about changing how this script works. And so what that's going to mean is, let's, inside of laser basic, add another variable called fire rate. And let's make that the variable that we're going to use to set the speed at which the player can attack. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to jump over to the multi-laser as well. And I'm going to also give it a fire rate. I'm going to make this a little bit more extreme just so it stands out. I don't think I would use that actual number, but for testing purposes, I do want it to be significantly slower. And let's add another thing here to my interface called get cooldown. Could have called it get fire rate. It's kind of up to you what you want to call it. But that way, whenever I spawn my projectile, I can just grab it from the setting from the projectile. Now that is going to upset, when I hit save, that is going to upset this, and we can just tell it to implement the interface. And then we will return my fire rate. And I'm going to have to go do the same thing over in laser basic. Why it doesn't want to show the fixes. You know what, I'm just going to copy and paste it. Adding my get cooldown method here. That solves my problem. And so now let's make it so that my player shooting script no longer has this attack cooldown variable. I'm just going to get it from the weapon that I'm firing. So let's go down to this code where we fire our weapons. This get fire 1 is going to be for my basic laser. Maybe we can even put some clarification here. We'll call this multi-lasers. Okay, so instead of just using this built-in variable that we just deleted, we can go get it from the thing that I just spawned. I could just say temp laser. Actually, let's just get it from the prefab. I could just say laser dot. Well, my brain's stopping. Get component player projectile dot get cooldown. So we could just request it from that prefab directly and get the cooldown from there. So I'll need to do the same for my multi-laser. Although, I guess this is kind of problematic because I'm literally specifying the prefab to take it from. But it's still not a bad solution. It's still pulling it from the weapon itself. It's guaranteeing the weapon must have some kind of definition of the cooldown for when you're able to fire again. So with that change, I also want to think about setting the damage. So again, it seems like weird for me to keep the damage here. So we may want to consider like a variable such as, call this like damage modifier. Basically implying that the player is able to gain some kind of buff that may change my weapon damage. And so the idea is, if I have this buff, I may want to alter the damage of my laser. So this is where we might need to make some decisions if we want to just directly get the script, or if we want to build in a method into player projectile that would allow me to change the damage. So just for the sake of kind of like leaving this here, we can just directly access this and say the damage of the laser will be plus equals damage modifier. So I'm able to tweak the damage based on a modifier on the ship. So that would allow me to get a power up or something that could change a damage bonus on my ship. And so we'll do the same over here. Notice I had to comment this out because it didn't have a laser basic script. And we'll just access laser multi. However, I did spawn 3 different lasers, so I am going to have to go through each laser and apply this damage modifier to each of those. And so that way each one that I have spawned could have a different damage modifier on it. So one last thing that I want to kind of take a look at, I guess let's just verify that all this works before we do that. Let's hit save. Right now, we actually can't, the only thing we should notice is that the multi-shot shoots significantly slower. Let's double check my player prefab, make sure everything's good with it. My script, everything seems to look fine. And now notice this now says damage modifier. So it's no longer getting all of its damage from that script. In fact, it's now the prefabs that determine your damage. The settings on these will do your damage. So let's hit play. And you can see that now my multi-shot is shooting significantly slower compared to this. Something to think about now, I may not keep it that slow, but the damage is pretty low. So that seems to be working. We would now have access to a damage modifier variable that we could apply. And the last thing I want to take a look at is possibly maybe messing with the color of these pop-up damage texts. Some neat little feature there. So if we go into my scripts, so let's go into Laser Basic real quick. We could put in some code here to adjust for the pop-up damage. Because if you notice, we are creating the damage pop-up here, and we're just defining the text color here. But we could be a lot cooler about it. We could add a new instance variable, and we can make it a color, and we can call it effect color. So let's go and define that color. And I guess if we really want, we could still, well, it'll default it to black, so it should be fine. So we'll hit save. And let's take a look at that script. Let's open up the player laser, because that's the script where I attached this effect color. And you can see it's given me this shade of black. I want to just steal the same color as that, so if I just hit the eyedropper, I can just go steal that shade of orange. But one thing to keep in mind is it is inheriting the lowest possible setting of the alpha channel, meaning it would be completely transparent. So slide that over to 255 and hit OK. And then we can exit this prefab. And now let's do the same for the other script. Let's add in laser multi a public float effect color. It's not a color, it's not a float, it's a color. Call it effect color. Hit save. And we actually just want to use that down here. Instead of using this text color variable, we can instead just use effect color for my damage pop-up. And let's go do the same thing in Laser Basic. We can take out this text color and instead just use the effect color there. Hit save all to make sure that our changes are committed. Let's go back in. We need to define the color. Well, we can actually take a look at what it looks like. I've defined the color of this laser. So you can see the text is more of a orange, but the text for this isn't even showing up. And that's because it's transparent. So we'll have to just take a look at this player laser multi-shot prefab, make sure we get a good color for it. And now we have it set. We can hit play, and so it should be popping up as a blue color as well. And so now we have a slightly more robust way to define the pop-up color. Now the crits are still going to be red. You'd actually have to go poking around in the code of the damage text to change that. And so I think that will kind of wrap this up as ideas for creating a multi-shot. That will lay the foundation for you to be able to create any number of weapon scripts, because having this interface is going to allow us not to have to create different code for this collision. It just has to deal with player projectile. And that if you need to do this where you might have multiple different scripts, you could do this with enemies. You could give enemies like an interface, and if the player had to access something about the enemies, then it could use the enemy interface. So this idea of interfaces and ultimately what's called polymorphism allows you to really simplify your code in some very meaningful ways. And so this is kind of a practical application of it. Otherwise, we would have had to make different tags for each different type of projectile that could hit an asteroid. That would get very excessive if you have like 20 different weapons. And so we'll end the video here. And hopefully this will give you some inspiration for creating your own weapon scripts. So thank you for watching, and stay tuned for some extra videos and extra content.